My name is Mr. Cadella, and today I'm going to show you the first couple steps for doing our name design with our line design. Now you can do your first name or last name on this. I just chose, of course, my last name, but you might want to do your first name as well. So first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I start on the back of my paper to do a little practice. So I'm going to write my name and class, top left-hand corner. That's very important. Now you're going to be looking up fonts online. You'll see a link in the assignment for different kinds of fonts, and we're going to just practice this right in the middle here. So I'm going to do my last name for this. Again, it might be better if you do your first name. I'm just going to go block this in using all caps. That's very important. And another thing that's very important, especially if your first or last name is longer, you want to make sure that you leave enough room here. Sometimes I see people, the last couple letters in their name, they try to cram it in a little space. That's why we practice on the back, is make sure that we have a nice spacing here as well. So now that I have this blocked out like here, these are like my practice letters. I'm going to go back over this with the font that I chose. So maybe I chose sort of just a regular block font here, like that. Say more like of a cartoon block font. You can choose a lot of different kinds of fonts. Now I'm going to practice this font right over those first letters that I drew. And of course I can always go back and erase that. Okay, I don't even need to right now since this is just practice. Here's another advanced tip. If you notice, I am actually overlapping some of my letters here as well. So you see they're kind of overlapping, kind of touching or overlapping there. So once you get the hang of the font that you chose, whether it's a cloud block font, a dripping font, something kind of crazy, weird, whatever you'd like to do, once you get the hang of it, we're going to do our same type of practice that we did, but we're going to do it on the front now. I would caution you against using fonts that are a little too crazy, like some of these really fancy, really curvy handwriting fonts. Those get a little hard to read sometimes. So now I'm going to do this on the front. Same thing I just did for the practice once I'm satisfied with my practice. And then I'm going to go back over it with Sharpie marker. The Sharpie marker we're going to be using is going to be a fine point Sharpie marker. Okay, we're going to outline all these letters, and we're going to do it fairly thickly. And you can also add, you'll notice I added a drop shadow to this, just a little shadow to make them a little bit more 3D. I just went down to the bottom of them and just made this bottom section here a little thicker underneath these letters. It gets a little tricky if you do, like, say, an O or something like that that has a curve in it. Some people ask, when do you know how to stop the drop shadow? It just kind of tapers off. It goes to right about there, and then you'll be done. Next, what we're going to be doing is adding the background. To do is I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm just going to draw some lines that go through this. They could be curved, they could be straight, just a few lines. In fact, I just might make this one sort of a zigzag line here, like that. I might put in one more over here. Notice how these lines overlap. They come through and they go from one side of the paper to another side of the paper. Alright? Now after you're done with that, in between these spaces, okay, that these lines have made, these little shapes, we're going to be putting different kinds of lines and patterns and just different kinds of designs in there. So again, you can always practice on the back of your paper if you need to. Okay, so for example, I might go ahead and I might want to say I'm going to draw this kind of line here. I'm going to do a bunch of those kind of designs, and I'm going to just repeat this over and over and over again. Something similar to that, maybe in this section right here. So there will be some examples of lines in this assignment, so check those out and get some good ideas. Okay, so did you see that I've now put in these lines and line patterns and things like that? I want you to notice a few things, that there's a lot of variety, but also notice something that's key as well. In each shape I've put very different kinds of lines, so these lines won't match these lines over here, so you can tell there's different kinds of lines in each shape. There's also, and as I finish this one up, I'll show you something that's kind of interesting that happens sometimes. People will choose a line that actually matches the letters, and that can be a little tricky. For example, instead of this kind of scallop line that I have here, what if I had chosen lines that went just straight up and down? Then that actually would have matched the lines in my letters, and then the letters would have gotten a little lost. So be careful of that. You also want to choose lines in the background that do not match your letters exactly, because then those letters could get lost. Next, I'm going to switch to my thicker Sharpie marker, just the fine point, and I'm going to trace those original lines that we did that created our shapes, those first lines that we drew in the background. I'm just going to trace those, put those in there, just like this. Be very careful. One of the reasons that we did not do this after we originally drew them is because sometimes you have to change your shape. And don't worry, you see I came off the line just a little bit there. Don't worry about that because we're going to be erasing any extra pencil lines. So don't worry about that. Try your best, take your time, and remember that Sharpie marker is not erasable. So you definitely want to be very careful when doing this. And you notice when I got to the edge, I was very careful not to go onto the table here. I recommend using some scrap paper underneath these projects, so just in case this permanent marker does come off the paper, it won't mark up the table there. Here's another thing I want to share with you is the ultrafine Sharpie marker, which has a thinner point. Now, you probably already guessed, we're going to trace over all these lines in the background with a thin Sharpie marker. So now you've seen I've went ahead and traced all those background elements with a thin Sharpie marker, a really ultrafine Sharpie marker. That's that thin point right there. And I saved just the thick Sharpie marker for just the name here. But also I bring to your attention that as I was working, I didn't trace all the lines precisely. I may have wanted to change it a little bit, adjust as I went. So I just did that with the marker, and I can always go back and clean it up with my eraser. And in fact, that's the step you need to be doing right now. Is go back over your drawing with an eraser, either on the end of your pencil or a handheld eraser, and you're going to go ahead and clean up all those extra pencil lines in your drawing.